morning, everyone. It's great to see everyone face to face. It's great to see some folks on the screen. I am Eric Smigel, Chair of Arts Live SDSU, and I want to welcome you to our second event in this semester's Discovery Series. This is the Electronic Music Marathon panel discussion, and we are recording this event, which will soon be available on our YouTube channel, and we'll be able to communicate that with you in the next couple days. We'd like to begin this event with the Kumi land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumi people have been part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumi. So I'm delighted to invite you into our Discovery Series project. And the Discovery Series is an annual selection of events that explore cultural, socio-political, technological issues through the visual and performing arts. And we're delighted to continue our collaboration with One SDSU. And in particular, I'd like to thank Amaris Gonzalez and her team for the Center of Student Organizations and Activities for hosting these panel discussions and their support of the arts across campus. So today's event is a celebration of the Electronic Music Marathon, which happens every semester. But this time, it's a culminating event of a course that's being taught, a very innovative course that features Professor Chris Warren and Professor Aaron Elkins from the Fowler College of Business, that combines elements of electronic music and visual media with big data management. And it's part of the Arts Alive SDSU Interdisciplinary Collaborative Teaching Program, which basically affirms and celebrates that the arts are more than just ornamental entertainment, but it's fundamental to the way that we generate knowledge, the way that we understand the world and create meaning. So I'm delighted that your professors have taken it upon themselves to invite you into their creative process so you can swim in your own. And I'm pleased to introduce the faculty lead for this Discovery Series event, Professor Chris Warren, our very own professor of electronic media, sound design, and digital composition. He will introduce the guests of the afternoon. Thank you, Chris.
Hey, thank you. All right, so let me introduce our guests to you. So we have here with us today Roger Linn, who is an electronic music innovator, the designer of the LM1 Linn drum machine, which all of the music that you heard as you entered here featured this fine machine. He is the inventor of the Linnstrument, which many of you, all of you who are in my class have played, and you'll see sitting right in front of him here today. And so I am beyond delighted that we're going to get an opportunity here to pick his brain, ask him a lot of wonderful questions that our students have submitted. Next, we have Christian Kjeldsen, who is a sound designer. He has worked at Rockstar and Sony Interactive. He has created sound design for a few little indie games you might have played, like Grand Theft Auto 5 and Red Dead Redemption. No big deal. So I know you are all well familiar with his work, and I hope we're going to get an opportunity to get some good insight here on what the life of a sound designer is like. And finally, we have Dr. Aaron Elkins from the Fowler School of Business. Dr. Elkins is our expert in big data. He is the man who knows how to sift through the numbers and find meaning here. So he has a lot to add to our conversation. So, my friends, let us get started. All right. Roger, the first question is for you. Of course, we want to know more about this LM1 drum machine. So a question that was submitted by our students is, Were you expecting the large popularity of your drum machine when you produced it? And what was it like hearing it on the radio constantly?
Well, I wasn't expecting it to be as popular as it was. It just happened to be the luck of the moment, and it was a technology that people found useful. Sampling, introducing sampling in drum machines, and it was absolutely wonderful hearing it on songs on the radio. The one that really stuck with me, there was an '80s band called Human League, and they had a song called "Don't You Want Me, Baby," or "Don't You Want Me," and it had the drum beat of the original LM1 in it, and it was the first one that was a top 10 hit. And I remember thinking at the time, I had taken the care to make all these features to make it sound more human, and nobody cared. They wanted to sound as robotic as possible. So it's a surprise, you know. I often say, I make the brush and the artist decides what to paint with it.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. All right. Christian, our students have asked, for games such as Red Dead Redemption and Grand Theft Auto, how big are the teams that you work in, and how long does it take to make a whole game like that?
Oh, so it depends on, it's since gone pretty global, so it was something like anywhere from 200 people, but probably like a lot more now, probably across multiple studios. I would say upwards of 1,000 or so.
And how many of these are sound designers?
Oh, okay, so specifically a sound designer. So probably it depends from studio to studio. Probably about like 4 or 5 sound designers per branch. So maybe in total about like 15 or so sound designers, depending on the branch, and like probably like 7 or 8 audio programmers, which is not the typical thing. So depending on the studio, some studios won't have any audio programmers, but yeah, Rockstar is a little different. It depends on the funding of the studio, so
Gotcha.
it varies.
Hey, can you tell us a little bit about how your work and the work of these audio programmers come together? How do you collaborate with these folks?
So with the audio programmers, in general, they could be anywhere from like low level like architecture aspect to like in-game design. So if you have specific things for a scene or like a particular thing in the game, such as like weather or like combat systems, ideally it's like an iterative process where the two of you are coming together and thinking of different scenarios and like a lot of modulations based off of like in-game variables and things that help drive sound and make them more dynamic. So it's definitely an iterative process. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Excellent, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Elkins, can you take this moment to tell our audience a little bit about this collaboration that you and I have embarked upon and that we have brought our students together to create?
Sure. So what Dr. Warren is referring to is a class that we co-developed over the last year. We were part of this Arts Alive program, and our initial connection was, well, I don't know who doesn't like music, but I tend to really love music. I'm a amateur musician from like high school, middle school. Everyone's got that connection to some degree. Music, we all listen to it, we hear it, we love it. Introductions were made to Chris because there's some overlap in a lot of our approach to our work. Even though Chris is music and I'm data and AI, I've specialized. So what is big data? I'm not gonna spend too much time defining things for you, but it's important because big data, AI, is one of those terms that tends to be losing meaning because everyone just says them now. When we talk about big data in modern AI, we're talking about analytics, which I think most people appreciate. We're talking about predictive analytics, which means we're trying to tell the future. That's the real story. But we're also talking about the data we use are different. We're using, no, it used to be a constraint, and it still kind of is, but the major constraint was the data that you use needs to be a matrix, a table like Excel. And so where does music fit into that? How does sound get analyzed? Well, the last 10, 20 years, sound and audio and video and all these things are starting to become commonplace in analytics. So my dissertation was actually on human speech. So I don't come from the music domain, I come more from the speech side, but there's a lot of overlap that, we take speech, we take audio, and then we extract features and we analyze it. That's a little bit of a prelude to tell you that there is actually a great synergy between our disciplines. The obvious is math and music. I think musicians know better than even us that there's tons of math. There's, it's just, when I listen to Bach, I feel I can do math better. And I think it's true because it feels mathematical. But that's not the through line, frankly speaking. So let me back up a bit. In the business school, artificial intelligence is a required class for our MBAs now. And you might wonder, why is that? Are they just technical? No, the world is technical. And it is now table stakes. Just like you need to know Excel to work in an office, you will need to know how to harness these analytics. And it's not that you're going to be a computer scientist who's building the algorithms, but you're applying them. And you're solving problems and you're making decisions with it. And so it's important we understand the tools and methodologies to build these models and predict reliably, but the actual skill is creativity. The problems are huge, they're multidisciplinary, and they're daunting. And there's no way out any longer with the challenges of today and the problems we're trying to tackle than to collaborate and to work on these things, together, and to be creative about it. It's like, how do we solve climate change? We better, this, our challenge and the audience's challenge principally, I imagine, and it's going to come with thoughtful creativity. And so what I try to teach people is not tools and methods, but, let the tool get out of the way and let your creativity shine. You've got a data set. And I often think of it, to the art analogy, as a lump of clay. And it's just this rough, coarse data set with nothing to offer. And little by little, you sort of mold it, little pre-processing, little, transformations, little, and eventually you get it, okay, and you deal with the errors and you fill in, you kind of lovingly tend to it, and then you model it, and then you fail, and then you try again, and then it's just this iterative. And so I guess the last dimension I think that is incorporated in this is creative scientific methodology. So we're not just saying solve problems creatively, we're saying solve problems creatively using the scientific method. And fundamentally, that's what we're really doing. I feel like music students and data students are all equally creative. They're expressing them in different ways. So I'll leave it there and I'll elaborate later.
Excellent. Thank you. Hey, that's a great lead into our next question for Roger Linn. Once the LM1 and the MPC were released and used by musicians, were they used in any ways that you did not anticipate?
Oh, yeah. And by the way, let me first just say, Aaron, one of the things about big data people who are very in demand up here in Silicon Valley is they're described as part scientist, part poet. Your job is to, and I've heard that said anyway, and your job really is to take this huge data set and find meaning, as you said, and it's a very difficult task, and sometimes you have to think outside of the box. Well, all the time you have to think outside of the box. Anyway, but to answer your question, Chris, yes, it's certainly true. When I first released my drum machines, well, as I said earlier, I was trying to make them sound as much as human as possible, inventing things like swing timing and quantization to help people make things in time if they're not skilled drummers, but at the same time adding some of those human feel aspects. And then the same thing I put in. At the time, there were no, in my first drum machines, there were no touch-sensitive pads. That didn't happen until I created it in 1984 with a product called the Linn 9000. But I put in multiple buttons for different volumes. And so my idea is that people would use these to create drum parts with dynamics, swing timing, and more natural feel. They didn't care about that. They just made it like in that Human League song. It was, and robotic sound was in at the time, and so sometimes I'd cringe when I hear these things. But it's the style, you know. And you know, another thing which is interesting, not so much with the first drum machines, but with the MPC drum machines that I made with the Akai company were used primarily in hip hop and dance music productions. I put in a certain amount of sampling memory because those machines contain the ability to sample your own sounds. And I remember I put in a total of 26 seconds, and I'd see people at trade shows, and they'd say, "Can you give me more memory?" I said, "What would you want it for? You can put as many drums as you want, including cymbals." He said, and they'd say, "We'd like to sample an entire 1 or 2 measure phrase, and with stereo as well." And I said, "That's ridiculous. Why would you want to do that?" And of course, sampling of loops became a wonderfully creative method for creating the base of a song and standing on the giants of the people who made the original recording. So, yeah, I'm constantly surprised. You
know. For those of you in the audience who may not know, the MPC is the instrument of hip hop. It is the instrument that really brought sampling to a desktop unit and made it accessible and made it part of this rich musical culture. All right, Christian, I have a question here asking you about your time at Berkeley. Can you tell us a little bit about the program that you went there and what you learned?
Can you repeat that last part? A car was going by, sorry.
Yes, the question is about your time at Berkeley School of Music. What was your program like there, and what did you learn there?
Oh, so at the time it was called music synthesis. I think currently it's called music production and design or something like that. But it was mainly understanding how to create synthesis patches, how to implement like different DSP techniques, convolution, like FFT, phase coding, stuff like that. And so the utilization and building of those types of things in the context of music. And so that was the foundation, which brought me to native instruments and then eventually to games, because all that stuff kind of like maps onto games really well because it's like very technology driven. So even though it wasn't really kind of like my initial like entrance into the world of like audio and my interest even, it kind of lended like really well to that kind of thing.
Christian, here's my loaded and self-serving question. Answer it carefully. Did you find that learning synthesis was helpful in your current career as a sound designer?
Yeah, because I mean with games it's interactive sound design, and so when you're dealing with the synthesizer, it's interactive. So it's expressive when you're dealing with like modulations and different types of like generators and such. All that stuff like maps on to games really well. So like something that comes from a game, such as like anything from like vehicle physics or like weather data or like combat systems, all that stuff are basically just like modulation values. And so thinking in the context of like modulations and like how that can be expressed in the context of just sound in general. Yeah, that was for me super helpful.
Excellent, thank you. Aaron.
I have a question for Christian. Because I love games too, like everyone else, interactive media, and I think sound has always been the most important component of games for me, and it has not always been a first-class citizen. I'm old enough to remember the 90s, and I was really initially got into computer games, and I had an Arial 3D accelerator type card, and I was like, wow, we've got this now. Now it's just going to keep getting better. we're going to have all these different sounds and all this high fidelity, and most importantly, binaural. Like, wow, spatial audio, and I don't have I just wear headphones, and like, and this was, I remember the stuff that they were doing in the 90s were amazing, and then something happened, something horrible. Sound went backwards. It's almost like, you know, I know the creative, I'm not going to get into the politics of it all. They did their thing, and then we stopped with these add-on cards, accelerators, which like we do with graphics. And it seems like sound went backwards. The sound quality went down. People stopped caring about it. And I feel like we're coming back around now with Atmos, and this, I'm almost overwhelmed by standards. So I'm curious, like, where's your feeling, and where do you think things are going with sound? You know, is there going to be a standard, or is that we're just going to have like Atmos and DTS and like spatial windows and like all these different, like, I'm curious, like, what is your take on where we might be going, what you see happening?
Yeah, so it depends on the format. So currently, like, PlayStation doesn't incorporate Atmos into their systems, but all of that stuff is basically, you know, with ambisonic and binaural data, you could basically like have virtual speakers anywhere. So there's nothing stopping you from like saying, oh, you know what, I want to place like my own array of, like, let's just say, like, I have 100 speakers, and I'm like, okay, well, where do I want to place it? Okay, well, I want to place one here and here. With something like ambisonics and binaural data, you could just say, oh, okay, cool, like, or I can virtualize a position and just say, okay, I'm going to place a speaker here in the room, and then in the game, this is where like a virtual, basically like listener is. But yeah, it's definitely going more and more towards trying to like simulate and emulate like reality. So you know, the higher fidelity of point sources you can have, like, the better and better. So currently we're going from, like, you know, first to third to like fifth order ambisonics, and that starts getting really good. But like with fifth order ambisonics, you have like 36 channels of like decoded data. So so it's like, okay, if I want like a single stem of like an ambisonic sound, then it has to be like 36 channels. So like now that's just like pre-rendered. If you want something like in game that's different, we start talking about like objects and like point source things, and those all get routed to like a ambisonics bus, or just like a binaural renderer. But I mean, you'll probably find this in Roger's industries as well. Like, the more and more cycles become available, like the more and more people use it. So it's not like, it's like, oh, okay, cool, now we can just like do so much more of stuff. Well, guess what? Like, everybody wants to do so much more. So like everyone just kind of like expands into each other's territory as far as like, you know, like the CPU cycles are concerned. And the other thing too is like early reflection technology, and like obstruction and occlusion, and like having things like portalize. If that doesn't make sense, just let me know. But like, if you're in a room, you have like different portals of like a door or a window or something like that. And depending on the structure, if it's like completely solid, like concrete, then everything sounds like it's coming from those little portals, right? So like having all of that stuff emulate reality is like kind of the gold standard. But it depends on the game that you're doing. If you're like a 2D side scroller, then like, who cares? But yeah.
Thank you. Roger, what constitutes a good drum sound for you? What do you look for in a sample?
Oh boy, that's so subjective. You know, when I made my first drum machines, I just thought I would get the best snare drum. And, you know, ultimately people said, well, I'd like to have a few different best snare drums. And I had the ability in my early machines to change the chips. You'd lift the lid up and change the chips out. Which is very cumbersome, and nobody would go to that trouble right now, but it's all you could do back then. It really depends what somebody wants to use. You know, snare drums have gone through evolutions. In the 80s, they were sort of gunshots. In the 70s, they were big, fat whoosh sounds. And then in the 90s, I don't know, there were a lot of different ones in there. So it's very subjective. It depends on what you're trying to do.
Do you have a favorite you'd like to point us towards? Anything in the LM1 that sticks out to you as any of your personal faves?
Well, all the original drum sounds were recorded by a good friend of mine named Art Wood, who was a drummer in LA. I was doing studio and tour work on guitar. He was doing studio and tour work on drums, and he always had great sounds. At one point I needed some drum sounds when I was developing the first drum machine. So I said, Art, can you come on over? And I just stuck him in a closet, and he has a snare drum or his bass drum and a microphone on it. And I'd say, okay, go ahead and hit it. And he did it. I said, thank you, Art. That'll be very good. And and he, of course, he was very helpful because he had very good songs. But it was really funny though, because I remember Bruce Springsteen had a concert in an arena. And so his drummer, Max Weinberg, was a very nice guy. Anyway, he emailed me and he said, why don't you come on down to the show? And I said, I'd like to see that. Nice. But what they had done is they found in the arenas, when you mic a snare drum, it just sounds like cardboard because it's such a huge place. So my drum machine called the Linn drum had a trigger input on the back. Now, it was not touch sensitive, but if you put a contact mic in the snare drum and put it into the trigger input on the back, it would always play at the same drum sound at the same volume. So it was really funny. I told Art about this at this concert. All night long was Art's one strike of a drum at the same volume on the same afterbeat through the entire 3-hour show. But it worked.
Awesome.
I will say also that it's so nice when that you make these products, and some people just sort of use them out of the box. They choose a drum beat and hit play. And other people are able to really find the creative uses out there. And that's one thing I really appreciated about Prince. He found sounds that a lot of people loved, and there were really good sounds by tuning the sample playback to different frequencies, and he really used them in a creative way that enhanced his music. And so, I never met the man, but I've thanked him by email a couple of times because he was basically sort of my marketing guy in a sense,
Oh yeah.
He did such wonderful things with it.
Excellent. Aaron.
Roger, is there a particular Prince song that stands out to you? Because I'm a big fan, but I want to be able to place the LM1.
Well, he used the LM1 on pretty much all his songs. I mean, the ones that stand out are Little Red Corvette, When Doves Cry, 1999. It was pretty much the drum section on all of his songs. So it was great to hear it.
Excellent. Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about the SDSU Ai Lab?
Oh, I can tell you a lot more than a little, but I'll keep it brief. So I joined the faculty in 2016, and I established and founded San Diego State Artificial Intelligence Lab. And so, we're principally grant funded. And so what we do is we try to solve problems in society. We principally work with government these days. We're in San Diego, so the United States Navy, we do projects with them. Department of Homeland Security. We're also Center of Excellence for Counterterrorism. So we're really trying to take AI in the support these modern technologies like augmented reality or VR and all these things, and give them. Right now, they're just tech oddities, interesting proof of concepts. And what we try to do is pair them with problems and AI and solve them. So, for example, one issue, the Navy, and I think we're all starting to appreciate the importance of logistics and supply chain in any operation, frankly. But, the Navy and the military are trying to modernize as they go. And some of the things they're interested in is, what does the Navy worker of the future look like? Not just the one we think about. I think most of our model of that is probably from World War II, when we think about what is the prototypical serviceman. And so they're thinking more like Geordi LaForge, from Star Trek Next Generation, headset, technology, holograms, spatial computing, they don't want to just adopt some of the technology they maybe skipped over. They want to really modernize. And so we do a lot of work like that. Homeland Security, we're working with people who, are vetting really massive data sets. So we're inventing technology, kind of like, you remember Minority Report? it gave us this idea that, hey, that was 10 years ago or so, I think maybe longer. They were doing all this, stuff, and it was obviously a bit dated. They were thinking about the time period into the future, but now we've got headsets that are projecting these things. There they had these screens. And, we're just trying to create the computing of tomorrow. Like right now we're obsessed with our phones, and, that's just a stopgap. It's kind of annoying. And the reality is our computing is going to come to us. We're no longer going to it. So spatial computing, your computer is where you are, and it's in your environment, and it's appropriately appearing at the right time, not just you constantly checking it. And so it's really integrating. I don't know how I feel about the metaverse. I have complicated feelings about that. I like inclusiveness. I don't like isolation, so not to say that's intrinsically, but if you've ever worn a VR headset, you felt isolated, and it's just the nature of the thing. So we do that kind of work. We also do other kinds of basic research. I work a lot now with psychiatry and mental health. And so, you may notice that this is a robot. Our principal interest is realizing the Jetsons. That's my principal interest, robot app, like as appliances, like the dishwasher. That's our best, I think, robot that has saved us many hours of manual labor. And to me, like, robots are here to do that. And I'm more focused on social robots. And so, for example, we're working on a project with adolescents diagnosed with bipolar disorder who need care and treatment. And we're developing therapy robots that are meant to, fill in the gap of access to good treatment and care. The number one, indicator of poor outcomes health-wise in psychiatry is money and access. And there's a shortage of actual clinicians who can attend to you. Moreover, they only see you once every few months. You need timely intervention. So, one of the technologies we think robots are a perfect fit is, therapy robots that work in tandem as collaborators with clinicians. So, our principal focus is on social robotics and emotional artificial intelligence.
Awesome. Hey, Christian, what does your typical day of work look like?
So it really depends on where we're at with the project. So if we're really early on, there's like a lot of experimentation happening. Things are a little looser. Just trying to get the foundational elements, as well as like leaving time for investigation and innovation. And then as you get closer to the end of the project, you have more and more milestones and deadlines and meetings and stuff like that. And towards the end of the project, you're just trying to put out fires. So it really, sorry, I didn't catch that, Chris. Well, I'll keep going until, I don't know. But yeah, it really depends. So just like any job, you have a team of people that you have to communicate with. You have bosses. You have tasks and you have to like check off. So it really depends. But I don't know if that answers your question exactly. But I mean, just like any office, you come into the office, check your emails. That's the other thing, is like, it sounds really fun and amazing from the outside, but when you go in, there's a lot of stuff that's like, okay, yeah, I have a boss, I have my emails, I have my texts and stuff I need to check, but so yeah, it just really depends. Cool.
So I may ask a question of you, Roger.
Sure.
Is there another instrument you've been thinking about? Is there some other kind of newfangled way to implement or support your music creation that you've been thinking about?
Well, the main thing these days for me is this thing, an instrument, and I'm making some different models out in the future. But the main idea of it is that everyone's playing music these days, the synthesized music with on-off switches, which is basically what a MIDI piano keyboard is. You turn the sound on, you turn it off. You know, it has very poor pressure sensing. After you've pressed the key 95% of the way, you press it a little more, it gives you a monophonic or sometimes polyphonic pressure signal. And it's got this funny sideways knob that is supposed to make you play natural pitch gestures, and it doesn't. And then it's got another sideways knob to make you do perfect vibratos or tremolos and such. And it's a lousy human interface for music. And so I and a few other people, we've been trying to make a better man-machine interface for performing electronic sound. And so there's My Instrument, there's the Rolly Seaboard made by Roland Lamb, there's the founder of the company. There's the Hawken Continuum, another one. And and there's a few others too. What all these instruments share is the ability to sense 3 continuous dimensions of your touch polyphonically. So you have a lot of presumably drumbeat players in the audience there. So I'll just give you a quick sample here. This is the feature I invented back in '84 called note repeat, or as it's called now, roll. We just vary the pressure. But this is sort of like roll or note repeat on steroids because I can vary the pitch. And if I tilt forward in this particular sound, I'm changing from a natural sound to a pressure-controlled filter. And then with my thumb, I can control the speed. So it's so much better, thank you. It's so much better than on-off switches. And the truth is, for 50 years, instrument makers, what have they been using for human interface? Standard off-the-shelf crap parts. And what are they? On-off switches, knobs, and sliders. We're making music with devices designed for data entry. So that's what I'm trying to get around with this. And this can make any sound, violin, guitar, clarinet, or applying those sort of gestures to synthesis sounds. So that's what I'm into.
I feel, Roger, that I recognize those sounds now. Was an LN1 used by Oingo Boingo?
I'm not sure.
That sounds like weird science to me. You tapped into an old memory, a dated memory of feeling.
What do you mean with what I just played?
Not just the sound, some of the sound. Like
actually, that's a stock drum set sound from Apple's Logic, and I just added the expressive control to it. And it uses this new standard called MPE, so I can actually do polyphonic. I can change the pitch on this one while I'm changing this one. So I have independent pressure, left, right, and forward, backward control for all notes. There's a sample still playing.
Hey, can you guys hear me again? All right. Apologies about that. All right. Christian, what was your first job in the industry? How did you find your way into sound design?
So my first job was with Native Instruments. Started off doing product specialist support, and then tech support, and then a little bit of sound design. And so that came about through a professor of mine at Berkeley, who kind of introduced me to one of the guys over at Native Instruments. And when I was in LA at the time, or prior to coming to Los Angeles, they said, "Oh, we're good. We don't need any like interns right now." So I was like, "Okay," but people, at least back then, were really open to like just having you come by and say hi and stuff like that. So that's what I did a lot. So I went to a lot of just different studios and whatnot, and went back to Native Instruments. And I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And they're like, "Oh, we actually do need someone now." And my current internship wasn't really going anywhere, so like I transitioned to Native Instruments, and then with same kind of thing with just tech support. Every time I would ask someone to like reboot your machine or whatever, I would just be like, "Hey, so what's going on? What are you doing?" And so I just start chatting people up, and people love talking about what they're up to and stuff. And so that's how I got my Rockstar gig. I was giving tech support to one of the sound designers there. I'm like, hey, so we just started like kind of like chatting like we're doing now, and he was like, oh, it sounds like you know what you're talking about. You want to, interview for this position. And again, at that time, I didn't have any kind of interest in game audio. It was more synthesis, but because of those, types of things like mapped on really well to sound design in games, I focused on that during my interview, and I guess I went pretty okay.
Nice. Hey, Christian, can you tell us a little bit about your use of VR in mixing?
I'm sorry, Chris, you're really low. It's really hard to hear you.
Oh, my apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better.
Better.
Yeah, Christian, can you tell me a little bit about your use of VR in mixing?
So I'm not a good person to ask. I haven't done any VR games, unfortunately, but
no, not VR games, but the actual use of virtual reality for the actual mix process itself.
Yeah, I mean, so like Aaron mentioned earlier, like the whole idea of like 3D audio from the perspective like of ambisonics and binaural sounds is relatively new as far as like wide use across games. Like usually before it was just specifically to VR, but so my experience is somewhat limited to that. But like I was saying before, there's different types of challenges with like ambisonics, recording in ambisonics. Like you have 36 channels, right? So you have like 36 sources of noise that you can deal with. And then if you need to make an effect, be it like a compressor or whatever, like that has to be a 36 channel effect. So yeah, and they all have to be linked because the way ambisonics work is that the first channel is your actual source, and all the other channels are basically just phase offsets, and so all that stuff has to be linked, or else your localization of sound gets off.
Gotcha.
And then the same thing with like, so you have like your bus structure for sounds now, or like basically like your channel speaker array, be it like 5171 stereo, and then like you have your ambisonics bus, and then you have like your binaural bus. So there's just more to consider now.
Excellent. Aaron.
I have a question for you, Christian. So you work working with PlayStation and Sony, you have access to some of their unique features, like sound is also integrated now in the controller, both as a speaker, but also to support the vibration such that it's a very unique vibration. How have you found that affecting your design or your mixing, and like what's it like to design sound coming out of a controller in tandem with what they're seeing, as well as with the vibration, which is also sound generated?
Yeah, so anyone interested in that question should really play Astrobot's Playroom on the PS5. It comes with the PS5, so if you have one, definitely play it. I know sometimes people are like, oh, it's just a whatever, like demo game, who cares? It's really, really good with haptics. And the haptics really, really get enhanced by that little pad speaker. So try turning it off, seeing how it responds perceptually, and then turn it on, and you could hear the difference because your brain kind of like links the two. So having things like like terrain, for instance, like materials like with balls like rolling over dirt and then over sand and like so forth. Like you could really feel the vibrations in your hand, and then in conjunction with the vibrations for those sounds coming from the pad speaker, like that also like adds another level of like asserting that, okay, this is what your perception should be experiencing. So yeah, those two together like really go hand in hand.
All right, I have one more question for Roger, and then I'm going to invite any students who have questions that they'd like to ask to please come line up right here by the side of the stage, and we'll get your question in. All right, Roger, what are some modern day music technology innovations that you are excited about?
Oh, there's many. There's a mode of synthesis called physical modeling, which I think is particularly exciting. I'm really sick of analog synthesis, and I liked it when I was a teenager, but it tends to make a lot of buzzy sounds, and it's good for making prototypes, but it isn't very accurate or rich or complex. So I love a particular synthesizer that's been in Apple's Logic since about 2005 called Sculpture. And here's an example. This is a physical model of a string with pickups on it, and it's being hammered by hammers, like a hammer dulcimer. It's just marvelous. That's just one of many sounds. You can do things with the y-axis, have feedback. You can create some very dissonant sounds. And to me, it's just so much better than either subtractive synthesis or which is good, but it's only really good for making prototypes. You can't get that richness. Or samples, which give you the richness, but only a snapshot, and it's not malleable, particularly not in 3 dimensions. So I think that's really exciting. And I actually have a lunch group every Wednesday, and a member of it is a guy named Julius Smith, who's a professor at
hey, my old professor.
Yeah, he's a good friend, actually a very good guitar player too. And he teaches at Karma, which is the computer music school at Stanford, which is only about 15 minutes from me. And he's created some wonderful papers and algorithms, filters for doing physical modeling. And a lot of people have given him credit for the work he's done. Another thing that I'm so excited about is VR. Right now it's in its infancy. I have an Oculus Quest 2, which is basically kind of like a mid-range Android phone strapped to your face. So it's not very good. It has horrible dynamic range. I don't think the resolution is anywhere near good enough, and it doesn't have near the processing power to really get past cartoons. So they effectively have turned all the beauty in the world into a cartoon. So I'm looking forward to people putting more power in. And there's Apple's rumored to have a much more powerful headset. My wife actually works for Apple, but she won't tell me anything, the bastard. So, so VR is very exciting to me. And the nice thing I like about it is that I can play with it now with the limited number of apps, and it allows me to experience all those cultural effects of the technology. For example, I have a friend who's very shy and never looks me in the eye, but when I meet him in VR, in Altspace VR or one of these worlds, he always looks me in the eye. His cartoon does. And all these things have an effect on how we interact, our social interactions in that world. And I just find it fascinating. The other thing that I'm fascinated by is, as you guys were discussing earlier, is the wonderful increases in graphics and audio processing in more powerful computers. Now, I don't have a Windows gaming system, but I do have one of the new Macs with the M1 Max chip in it. And so I noticed a couple of games went onto the App Store, and one of them is the old Myst game, which I played in the 90s, and I loved it because you don't have to shoot anybody. You're just learning things, and you're in a beautiful world. And I just love how they've recreated this all in Unreal Engine And so it's just fun to play. But the other thing too is I got Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is also available for the Max M1 Max, and it's just beautiful. These scenes that happen in there. The only problem is I kill that girl about 20 times every hour, and it's like I'm there for the beauty. It's like if you want to go to a museum to see some beautiful paintings, you have to kill the docent. It just makes no sense whatsoever. I would like to have more games where you don't have to kill people, and there's so many shooting games. It's just kind of silly to me, but it'll all come around, and it'll eventually happen more. But it reminds me of the beauty of these worlds that you can create there. There's a good friend of mine who just recently passed away, John Appleton. He was a professor at Dartmouth of music and also a creator of synthesizers too. And he didn't know too much about VR, and he says, well, can we meet? Can I put on a headset and can we meet in a cafe in Paris? And I think that's such a great example. What we don't want ourselves and our environments to be reduced to cartoons. We'd like that richness and detail and beauty, and that takes a mammoth amount of processing power. And I figure, if Apple makes this thing or somebody else does, it's going to be another 10, 15 years, and every year it'll be better. And the headset that you bought and you thought was marvelous, you'll just want to throw away when the next one comes out every year. But anyway, so those are things I'm interested in. And people have made some good apps for the Quest for music conducting, not so much for music performance, but music conducting, and so there's some great ideas there. I like the malleability of it. And I think the metaverse is actually a very exciting idea. And I hang out in Altspace VR. Not so much the Facebook world horizon, because I can't stand Mark Zuckerberg, but Altspace VR at least started out with a different culture. So anyway, that's it.
Awesome. Christian?
Yeah, I just had a quick comment for Roger and a question for Aaron. So if you want to play games that don't kill people, check out Flower or Journey. Journey is incredible. I love Journey.
Flower and Journey. Okay.
Yeah, I think they might be specific to PlayStation, and they may be on the PlayStation 4 specifically, but they may be on other platforms. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But also jumping off of Roger's remarks for physical modeling, Aaron, do you have any experience or do you have any thoughts on physical modeling and AI and how that may be something that can be done real time? Because from what I understand, a lot of that stuff is an offline process that's kind of rendered cycle by cycle. So are there anything?
And so graphics AI isn't quite my area, but I pay attention to it because we intersect quite a lot and we need those accelerators. A lot of it we use for deep learning and things, but their original intent was big matrix operations for graphics. And I think NVIDIA just announced real-time path tracing card. And so, yeah, we're getting there. I can't believe how far we advanced in 2 to 4 years. I remember we were just talking about, can we get 4K? And they're like, now we're doing 120 hertz 4K and ray tracing, which is the lighting model that is the most realistic for that, recreating the environment. And now we're even getting path tracing soon. So if you would have asked me 4 years ago, I'd be like, no, we're so slow. But AI has made it possible because we're using shortcuts. We're able to simplify the search space in real enough that we can do a real coarse path or ray trace and then fill in the gaps with AI. And so, yeah, I didn't even predict that, I was wondering how we're going to get 4K. And then we're like, oh, we're just going to do lower resolution and upscale it with AI. And, so that's how a lot of the PS5 games use these kind of TAA approaches for upscaling and stuff. So I think Unreal 5 was just announced and it has this marvelous capacity to create, these large open worlds, which I think fits nicely into your kind of creative space. But yeah, and it's going to be necessary because as Roger mentioned, these headsets are like mid-range Android phones, and they're not, as much as I love the rendering, not everyone has a supercomputer PC with at this rate, a $2,000 NVIDIA card, to play games.
Yeah.
So average people are using 4 or 5 year olds. So they're not all getting that technology. So a lot of the streaming now is happening in the cloud. And I used to also say that's not possible. There's no way I would want to play a game when I'm worried about 5 to 15 milliseconds of input lag. How could it go across the world and back and give me input? They're doing it. And so all the issues that I was worried we weren't able to surmount to create these marvelous worlds and low power devices is being fixed by like the cloud and by AI. And so, yeah, this is a really cool time. I'm really in HDR. Like all this cool stuff is being integrated.
Like foveated rendering, which I think is in both Unreal.
Oh
and
yeah,
Unity.
eye tracking. That's a big part of my research. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Brendan. Thank you so much, Roger and Christian, for being here. I have to do this a little bit because I'm a little short. My question is for kind of both of you. I first thought of it as a video game audio question, but I think it applies to both. So when making an instrument and a video game, which is kind of like an instrument, there's a lot of like positive feedback and finding ways in the design of the audio and design of the audio UI, like telling the interactee, what you're doing is good, what you're doing is positive, you should explore, you should keep going, And for video games, that's like prompts to encourage the player to explore an area, for instance, or explore a mechanic. For an instrument, it could be trying out some of the new modulation, some things that maybe people aren't familiar with because it's a new instrument. And I would just love to hear from both of you what your approach is to encouraging that kind of a positive experimentation. It's like positive encouragement in audio form, and just what your thoughts are on that.
You want to start, Chris?
I was gonna say the same thing. I don't know. Do you want to go?
I'll go. That's fine.
Yeah.
Well, I think that you want to make something that's so compelling that people can't help but to put their hands on it and play it or play with it. You want, at least that's what I try to do. There's a lot of people who buy an instrument and they just think the lights are very cool, even though they're functional. But it just calls, the thing is, a musical instrument, for players of musical instruments, we've all had the experience of going to a music store and getting an instrument, and there's this potential wonderfulness that is in this instrument, and your job is to unlock it. So you want to be able to make sure that the instrument is functional. It really does do some great things, and you can tell that story with videos. Videos are the best way to do it. I don't even do trade shows anymore. It's not worth it. But videos are great. And then a lot of instrument players, there's about 3,600 of them out in the world today, they submit videos too. And it's wonderful because it's everyone's different take on how to use it. So I think that's probably the best thing to do is create an instrument that really does allow you to do what you're really wanting to do. Show it to people, get feedback, make sure that you're not just making something for you, but you're making something that people can actually use and make money, Freudian slip, make some music with, and then give demonstrations of that, because some people don't have as much vision as others. Some people can just look at it and say, I know exactly what I can do. Some people need to be shown. So I think that's the best way to do it.
Cool. I wasn't sure if the question was geared towards positive feedback from the perspective of in the game, like you're doing something wrong or you're doing something right. So maybe I'll just answer that because I think Roger already did a great job at answering that side of it. So, I mean, obviously we have things of like consonants and dissonances in audio that you can like say like, okay, this is good, this is bad. So you can lead the player in that perspective. And then also with games, you have an idea of like, the forward facing aspect of like the player. So like if the player is like, has like this cone around them, you can minimize that cone and say, oh, okay, like everything outside of this particular sound starts like getting duller, or like, the attenuation starts like dimming. So those are types of things you could say, oh, okay, this is the area that you're supposed to be going in. I don't know if that was the question, but there you go.
All right, we've got one more student question. Come on.
All right, I guess this is a question for both Christian and Roger. What's the difference between Ambisonic and other multi-channel surround sound systems?
Gosh, I think that one's better for Chris. I'm really not sure about all of those details. I've heard a lot of things over the years, but when I hear those words, I think it sounds more like real life this is coming from over here, and it's not just a volume panning, it's Haas effect and tricks that make you actually think that's right over there, and it's sitting there very comfortably in that one spot. But Chris, you'd have a better explanation, I think.
Yeah, so for Ambisonics, the thing it tries to emulate is the interaural and interintensity time differences between the two different ears. So like in an ambisonic space, you'll never hear something coming in one ear. So if you put on, if you're playing the PlayStation, for instance, and you like plug in your headphones to the little controller, you'll start getting like ambisonic audio. Sorry for the horns. If you turn off ambisonics in just the system, and something's 100% to your left, like you'll hear it only in your left ear, right? And to a person who's just out in the world, that's very unnatural. Like that never happens really, unless you just like close one ear. And so what Ambisonics does is it tries to like mimic that aspect of having two ears and what it's like to be in the world with two ears. So even if it's coming 100% from one side, you'll still hear it from the other side because that's how you localize sound. And so basically Ambisonics tries to emulate the localization of sounds by the interaural, the delay differences, the time differences, and the intensity differences. So if something's like right in front of you, because the time difference is the same as something like right behind you, it's a little bit harder to perceive. The only difference is like your ears are filtering things. And so that's what the HRTF basically does. Like if you get a custom HRTF, like it'll pretty much 100% mimic the world around you, because you're getting like all those natural like reflections like off of like the different aspects of your ear and like the filtering from behind your ear. Whereas like a basic channel based system like won't do that kind of thing. But going into like the mathematics of it, like it's very, if you just look up ambisonics, there's like first, second, third, fourth, etc. order, and the more and more like the higher the order, the more channels you get, and the more like different phase differences you get, meaning like you get a higher resolution of like Roger was saying, like of like point sourceness. So the difference too is like you get like a height and like a height difference. You can, it's really honestly difficult. Like if you even like have someone, if you close your eyes and have someone like snap like right above you, like it's really hard to tell where it's coming from, like even if it's like below or above. But it tries to do a good job of doing that.
Well, plus I understand you do contextual clues. For example, if you have something that's right in front of you and it's a helicopter, it's probably not beneath you.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely, like having those clues fills in the gaps, and having things also move. Like if you have like if you have something static in front of you, like if you close your eyes and you snap, it's a lot harder to tell versus like it moving. So like if someone starts moving around you, it's like, oh, okay, cool, it's coming from over here. But if it's static, then it's like it's a lot harder to tell. So that's another aspect of that kind of perception.
Christian, how are you imagining gamers playing your game? With headphones, high fidelity Sennheisers, earbuds, AirPods, sound bars, TV speaker? Like what's the, how do you, I mean, it must be a huge challenge to try to mix to all of that. But what do you imagine when you think about people playing it and your sound being listened to?
I mean, you have to kind of, we do have metrics for what people are using, but it kind of runs the gamut. Like sound bars are like becoming really popular, and like headphones are really popular. So so yeah, anyone that has like any headphone that I forget what exact, like that doesn't have to be powered. If you, like for instance, my Sennheiser HD 600s like need a good bit of power to reproduce audio well. So I forget what the exact tech specs are, but any headphone that doesn't require a headphone amp, you can just plug it straight into like the controller, and you get like, you know, depending on the game, like 360 like 3D audio. But it just runs the gamut. So yeah, we do have different presets depending on what people are using. Like, oh, if I'm using TV speakers, like sometimes some things will be detectable, but other things won't. But like we can detect like if you plug in your headphone, okay, like you're using 3D audio unless you turn it off. So we have like different EQs and compressors and things like that for that type of thing.
Yeah, I'm really liking that trend where it used to be the graphics was the big settings menu. And now in audio, we're starting to see options. It's like what kind of dynamic range, what's your speaker layout, even like sometimes what's the angle of your speakers. I'm like, whoa, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Like you can really calibrate it and spend some time with it.
Yeah, so there are like other options like midnight mode and stuff like that that have its own issues from like a UX perspective, because if you say like cinematic, like that's very biased. Like
What does that mean? Maybe you could tell me. I've been curious.
Usually cinematic mode means there's like full dynamics, like as if you're in a theater. So like if you notice you're listening to a movie and you're at home, you probably like for loud music or loud explosions or whatever, like that's very unconducive to the space for like a typical living room situation, because there's a lot of reflections, and that amount of that dB level is gonna like get accentuated by all those different reflections. So like a lot of times, like my wife will be like, oh my God, like turn down the volume. Okay, turn it up, like turn it down. And so for cinematic mode, it's like as if you're in a theater with like a totally proper like sound absorption. And so the problem with that is that people think cinematic, well, it's like, oh, I want something cinematic, so I'm going to do that. But that's inappropriate for their space. So like another issue is going to be like coming up with like good like UX terms for people. That's like, okay, cool, yeah, this is like a living room situation, or this is like whatever the case, like midnight mode or like that type of thing.
Excellent. All right, my friends, we are out of time, but please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their expertise with us today.
There's an uproarious applause that I hope you were able to hear a little bit for our guests. So let's thank once again Roger, Christian, Aaron, and our very own Chris for such a stimulating session. And as a reminder, the Electronic Music Marathon will take place here in Smith Recital Hall on Saturday, April 30th at 6 o'clock. And I think it's going to run until maybe 10. Is that at least, perhaps longer? Also, if you've registered for this event, we're going to send you a survey, a very brief survey. We ask you to please complete it so that we can improve our programming in the future. And we encourage you to attend other events by Arts Alive SDSU and also One SDSU. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your week.